Hi there, welcome everybody, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. And thank you for joining this APMG webinar. My name's Mark Constable. I'm from the team here at APMG in the UK, and I'll be moderating today's session. I'll largely be in the background just monitoring questions and ensuring the session runs smoothly. We're teaming up with SPOCE Project Management for today's webinar. I'm delighted to be joined by Nicola Busby and Sarah Mullins. Nicola is an experienced business change consultant, trainer and author, and Nicola will be focusing on how change management skills can be employed to improve project performance and results. Sarah will conclude the main presentation with details on change management training and the associated APMG exams. Before I hand over to Nicola and Sarah for the main content, I just need to cover a few general points about the session. So the first of those is we are recording the session, so everyone that's registered will receive a follow-up from me in due course with a link to the webinar's recording. You've got an opportunity to raise questions today, so you should be able to see something on your control panel where you can submit questions, unless you're joining us from a mobile device, which you probably won't have that option. I'll be monitoring those throughout the session, and we're trying to address as many of those as we can towards the end. We've got a poll question as well, so just after Nicola gets into things, we'll put a poll up on screen just to get them to know the audience a little better. And finally, we welcome any feedback on the webinars, of course, because our intention is to make these as informative and as relevant as possible, so any feedback is more than welcome. So that's all from me at this stage. It's now over to Nicola and Sarah to take you through the main content. It's Nicola up first, so over to you, Nicola.
Thank you, Mark, and welcome everybody. Okay, as Mark mentioned, we're going to start with a web poll to get us into the mood of business change management. So I think it's just about to come up on your screens. So have a quick think about the organisation you currently work in or one you've worked in the past. And in your experience, how well does your organisation manage change? And you've got some options there. You've got very well, fairly well, okay, fairly badly and very badly. So have a quick think and just click what's most relevant for you.
Yeah, that should be on screen for everyone now.
Excellent. And it's completely confidential. We can't trace it back, so be as honest as you like.
Right, that's most of the votes in now, Nicola, so I'm going to close that one down.
Okay.
Can you see the results there?
No, if you could read them out, that'd be great.
Okay, so we had 4% very well, 15% fairly well, 44% okay, 20% fairly badly, and 17% very badly.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. And congratulations, those of you who are in the 4% of organisations that manage change very well. These results aren't particularly surprising. Most of the organisations that I work with struggle to manage their change. And really, that's what we're going to talk about this morning. So, let's have a look at this first slide. And when I run the APMG change management course, I often begin by asking the delegates to have a think about when change has gone well for them, when they've experienced good change, what has gone well, and if they've experienced bad change, what has gone badly. But most importantly, I also ask them to think about how they felt. And these are some of the answers that often come back. So when change has gone well, people have clearly understood the need for change. There was strong sponsorship and leadership. It was properly planned and managed. There was clear communication, two-way, and involvement. People were empowered and the benefits of the change were identified. What's in it for me? And when change has gone badly, they didn't understand the reason for change. There was a lack of the understanding of the impact of the change. There was poor sponsorship or no sponsorship or leadership, ineffective communications, no chance to feedback. Change was imposed and happened too quickly. There was a lack of trust and a lack of support. And then if you look at the bottom, when change has gone well, people felt empowered and excited, motivated, proud, energized and optimistic. And when it went badly, people felt scared, powerless, unsettled, demotivated, lost and frustrated. And that's really what business change management is all about. It's trying to ensure that whenever a change happens in an organization, it goes well and people feel all of those positive things. And we try and minimize those bad and negative emotions for people. So why do we do it? I mean, obviously it's nice for people to feel good and to feel empowered and energized and optimistic, but that really isn't enough for most organizations to build a business case to resource change management. So we need a little bit of evidence, really. And this comes from looking at the current failure rates of change. And failure rates of change are currently very, very high. There's some research here that says that they have been reported as high as 70 to 80%. Anybody out there who is particularly interested in their research will know that this has been actually challenged, and we think this may be a little bit high now, but failure rates of 50 to 60% are often talked about as well. And even if we're talking about failure rates of 50 to 60%, that's way too high for the investment that we put into change. So what do we mean when we talk about failure? What's interesting about these results and these failure rates is they haven't really reduced since major projects started being put into organizations in the 1970s. And this was when we saw the big infrastructure IT projects going in the public sector. And failure rates then were incredibly high, but they were failures of scope, time and cost. So most projects went hugely over budget. Most of them were delivered very, very behind in schedule, sometimes in years late. And often the thing that was built or the thing that was delivered wasn't usable for the organization anyway. So those were the kinds of failures that were seen when major projects started in organizations. And this is really why the project management profession grew, because project management is all around putting controls around those things to make sure that projects are delivered on time, within cost, and to agreed scopes and quality. Project management is now a mature profession, and I think the governance around projects is much, much better than it was in the 1970s. It's not perfect, and organizations do still struggle with it, but we are seeing projects delivered more successfully. But those failure rates are not going down. And so what is failing now is the ability for the organizations to realize the benefits from their changes. So projects are going in, but people are not changing the ways of working to use those new changes and therefore get the benefits of the change. And so again, this is a people issue, and this is where a lot of interest is now being put in business change management as the kind of the missing link into translating those project deliverables into success. But it's not all doom and gloom. Some research by ProSci says that a few top performing organizations experience success rates of over 80%. That means that every change the successful organizations put in, over 80% of them will realize their benefits. So what are these organizations doing that the rest of us aren't? And a bit of research by PwC says that there's an undeniable correlation between project performance, maturity, and change management. So this means that the majority of the best performing organizations apply change management to their projects. So what do we actually mean by business change management? What are we talking about when we say that we apply business change management to our projects? And in projects, there tends to be three things to focus on. The first of those is the object of the change. This is the thing that's actually going to change. And this can be tangible, such as a new IT system, a new building, or it can be slightly less tangible, like a new culture, a new focus on a market segment. But you can generally describe what that is, that object of the change. Alongside that are the associated activities. These are the things that all of the people need to do differently in order for that change to work. So it's processes, it's new ways of working, new ways of behaving. And then at the top, you've got the people involved and affected by the change. Every single person who is involved in organising, planning and making decisions about the change need to be confident and positive enough that they can involve themselves in a useful way. And every end user who has to do something differently because of the change needs to make that decision to change their ways of working, to change their behaviours, possibly even to change their values and cultures. And it's only then that the object of the change and the associated activities will be adopted and the benefits of the change will be realised. So how does business change management fit in with the project and program environment? And the answer is it can fit anywhere, because business change management is in addition to, rather than instead of, all of the other really good project and program methodologies that we're using to keep the scope, time, cost and quality of our projects as we want them to be. And on this diagram, we've just got a standard setup for a P3M portfolio of projects. So at the top we've got our business vision, and then it rolls down into a portfolio of changes which can be worked on as programs and projects. And when these are completed, you've got your transformed business underneath. Your strategy is realised and your benefits are realised. And business change management can sit in various places. It can sit at project level, so you can have business change managers sitting with project managers, working on the people side of your individual projects. You can have business change managers sitting at program level, working on the people issues of rolled up projects into a program. Or you can have business change management sitting at the portfolio level, where you've got a business change manager more as a subject matter expert, or an internal consultant, really building the capability of the organisation itself to manage ongoing change. And this really depends, where you sit business change managers really depends on the makeup of your organisation, the types of changes you're doing, and also the maturity of your organisation, how confident and set up your organisation is to manage change. There is a hybrid role that I see advertised quite a lot, and in fact I've done one myself, which is the role of a business change project manager. And this tends to sit at project level, and it's one person doing the role of project manager and business change manager. And I struggle a little bit with this role, because it really brings up the difference between the business change manager and the project manager, and really highlights where business change managers add value to projects and programs. So the business change manager always sees the world through the eyes of their stakeholders. So every decision made within that project and program portfolio space, the business change manager is constantly asking, how will that affect my stakeholders? How will they feel? Will this increase their engagement, or will this decrease engagement and increase resistance? And often the business change manager comes into conflict in some ways with the project manager. Because of finite resources, the business change manager will need to fight for resources for engagement activities, possibly the rollout, a rollout that looks good for a project manager in terms of cost and time will look hurried for a business change manager, and they may need to bid for more time for their staff and their end users to get used to the change before it's rolled out. So there's tensions there which can really put a business change project manager into conflict. However, it can be done, the role can be done. It can be done best for projects that either have very little technical issues in it, so the project manager can focus on the people, or it can also work for projects which have very little impact on people, and therefore the project manager can focus on the project. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the skills and the knowledge needed and the activities that business change managers do. We'll talk about the activities that come into the APMG change management course and the history of that. So there's an organisation called the Change Management Institute, which is a professional body for business change management worldwide. And they developed the Effective Change Managers body of knowledge. And they did this through the experience of over 600 change management professionals in 30 countries. And they really gathered the knowledge that those change managers said they needed to know to be successful in their roles. And they rolled that all together into the change management body of knowledge. Then APMG, who's partnered with the CMI, in a strategic partnership, has taken that body of knowledge and built out the 5-day change management course, really in so teaching people those skills and those knowledge that they need to be successful. So everything we cover on the course goes back to the body of knowledge. So at the end of the course, you will have a good understanding of the knowledge and skills you need to be a successful business change manager and fulfill the body of knowledge from the CMI. So what does it look like in practice? The difference between Prince 2 or MSP or Agile Project Management, if anybody's done any of those courses, and the APMG Change Management course, is that we do not deliver a methodology. And the reason for this is change management is so different. Your approach to change management has to be tailored depending on the different factors that your organization finds themselves in. And this is dependent on the culture of the organization, the type of change you're doing and the impact it will have on the organization, the history of change in the organization, the types of stakeholders you're dealing with and their concerns about the change, the amount of change that's going on in the organization in addition to your change, and all sorts of other factors like that. So what we do on the course is we teach you the skills and the knowledge and the ability to analyze those factors in your organization and then build out your own bespoke approach to change for the situation that you find yourself in. Having said that, you know, every change and every project does follow a linear process in some ways. So if you look at the diagram here, on the top we've got the four generic sections of a change plan or a change project. To first of all, you identify your problem and the solution you want to put in. You then plan your change, you deliver it, and then you embed it. And under there, we've listed all of the skills, knowledge, and activities that we do as business change managers, and we cover in the course. Then for us as business change managers, underpinning everything are two things. The first is stakeholder engagement and communications. Because we are so focused on our stakeholders, obviously we need to work with them, and the way to do that is to engage and communicate with them. And then underpinning everything as our kind of bedrock as business change managers is we really need to understand a little bit about the psychology of individuals, because we are working with those individuals doing change. So we need to understand a little bit about what happens to people as they go through change. We need to know a little bit about motivational theories, you know, what motivates people, what demotivates them. We need to understand a little bit about how people are different, and we need to know how people learn and their learning processes and learning styles. And that's really our knowledge and our theory that underpins everything as a change manager. And for me, when I run the course, there's 3 success factors and 3 things that if it happens that I get to Friday afternoon, I think, yes, we've done all of those, I think the week is a success. First of all, obviously every attendee wants to get the qualification and get the certificate, and that's absolutely fine. So providing everybody passes, that's a good week. But the other 2 things are that during the course, we try to work through case studies for people's real life changes, so that people who attend the course are able to immediately go back to their organization the next Monday morning and start putting this stuff into practice and start getting value from change management in their projects. And the third thing is that people start to think like business change managers throughout the week. And by that, I mean that you really look at the world through the filter of your stakeholders. You start to feel empathy with your stakeholders, and you start to always ask the question, what do my stakeholders feel and how are they going to react to the things that we do in our projects? So I can't go through absolutely everything that we do in the course and all the skills and knowledge we need as business change managers, because that would take pretty much 5 days. So what I would like to do is to focus on 2 activities that are traditional areas of failure, traditional points of failure in our projects. Remember, we've got very, very high failure rates at the moment in our projects because our people are failing to adopt the changes and really realise the benefits in a lot of cases. So the 2 areas I'd like to focus on, one is at the beginning of the change, and that's really understanding the impact of your change on people through an impact assessment, and the other is at the other end of the change, which is around how to actually embed the change once the project has delivered the products. So let's have a look at the impact assessment first. And in the course, we use the model, the McKinsey 7S model for the change, which I think is a very, very effective impact assessment. And the reason that I like the model is because it looks as an organization as a series of interconnected areas. And it looks at what we traditionally call the soft areas around people, around cultures, and around behaviors, as well as the harder areas, the more tangible areas around systems and structures. So I'd like to talk you through a quick example of where we used this in a course. I had a couple of project managers come onto my course who were starting to do a finance system change in an energy company. And they worked through this impact assessment as project managers. And so what we did is, first of all, we looked at the systems. And they said, actually, there is going to be some change to the systems in our financial system change, because what we are going to do is take out all of the finance systems that the organisation is currently working with, and there were lots of disparate systems all around the organisation, and we are going to put in one standardised system for everybody. And so they looked at this and said, well, what is the impact of that going to be? And we were just rating it on a red, amber, and a green. And so they said, this is amber, this is going to be a middling impact for people. They then looked at structure, and they said, well, actually, the structure of the organisation isn't going to change very much. The people out in the business who currently monitor, record, and manage their finances will stay the same. There will be minimal structural changes within the finance team itself to ensure they can use the new system. But on the whole, not too much of an impact there. So they called that green. They then looked at the skills, and they said there will be an impact, because anybody who's using the finance system out in the business and in the finance team themselves will need to learn to use this new system. So they'll need to know what buttons to press, what processes to follow, and where to enter data and when. So they called that amber as well. And then they came back to me and said, okay, we've done our impact assessment, and this is what we've come up with. And we decided then to go back and redo this impact assessment, looking at the world as business change managers as opposed to project managers. So we actually looked at the impact that a stakeholder may feel from this change. And the overall picture was completely different. So the first thing we looked at was strategy at the top, and we started saying, well, what were the actual drivers for putting this new financial system in? And it turns out that the history of the organisation and the reason for putting the new system in was that it was an alternative energy company, and it had always been very, very well funded up until this point. It started in the 1960s, and it had a lot of government grants, a lot of money from government to develop alternative energy solutions, and it also attracted a lot of funding from various research organisations, research and development organisations. And it really was a leading alternative energy research and development company in its field. Over the last couple of years, the government had said that it's reducing its funding, and had also warned that there would be further reductions in the future. And on top of that, the organisation was also seeing a reduction in the kinds of research, the amount of research grants it was getting, for a couple of reasons. One was that there's just less money around now than there was sort of 10, 20 years ago. But also there has been an increase in competition. So there are more alternative energy companies now vying for those research grants, and therefore less of those grants were going to this company. Therefore, the senior leaders of the organisation had decided that they needed to focus much more on efficiencies across the organisation, and much more on getting in alternative sources of money and income, and becoming more commercial, maybe having to sell its products, maybe having to make decisions that it focuses its research and development on areas where there is money. And actually that's a big change in the strategy of the organisation. So we actually marked that as red, as to notify that it was a big change. We then looked at style. Now, style means leadership style. What is needed for the leaders to run the organization? And again, we noticed that there was a big change, because if the organization was moving from a sort of having a real pride in its research and development, and basically having fairly unlimited money and being able to just choose where it does its research and development, more on the interest in the science than is in commercial in commercial decisions, there was actually going to be a big change in leadership style to change from that to an organization where every decision of where to do the research and development had to be backed up by a financial and commercial decision. It may be that the leaders would have to make decisions that were uncomfortable for people and unpopular for the research and development staff. It may be that there would have to be more focus on performance, and there may have to be more targets, and the organisation may have to be more streamlined, which could mean some difficult conversations and some changes in leadership style to become a more efficient organisation. Therefore, style was also red. We then had a look at staff, and this means the actual capabilities of the staff themselves. And there was obviously a big capability in this organisation around research and development and scientific knowledge. But in the new world, they were going to have to build additional capabilities to support that. And there were going to have to be capabilities in financial management, in running as a business, in commercial decisions, and also around project management. The projects and the research and development projects generally ran very, very late and changed their scope and ran over cost a lot, as because the focus really was on coming out with the best possible outcome. And this was going to have to change, and it was going to have to, everything was now going to have to be done within the scope of set budgets and a real focus on budgets. So there was real capability changes in there as well. Then they had another look at skills, and actually the skills, there were additional skills needed in this new organisation on top of the ability to just use this new financial system. And we've already talked about these in capabilities, but there would need to be skills around project management. There would need to be skills around monitoring, financial monitoring, efficiency monitoring. There would be need to be skills around making commercial decisions and keeping an eye on what's going on in the real world. So actually, we changed skills to red. Systems they decided would stay the same, structure they decided to stay the same, but then they had a look at shared values, and this really comes to the heart of the organisation. This is the culture, these are the values of the organisation. And so having a look at everything they discussed, they realised that actually there was a huge change in the cultures and the values of this organisation. The values really had always been around, you know, top world-class research, no holes barred, everything else is a barrier, you just get out of the way. And it's this pursuit of excellence in their research. Now, if you all of a sudden move to a more commercial type of organisation, then your values are going to change, and it's going to have to be tempering that research with other considerations, including financial considerations, commercial considerations, what's happening around in the marketplace and the wider environment. And therefore, actually, that was red too. And so the project managers looked at this new impact assessment. They went slightly pale, but then they said actually it was really, really good, because they could understand now the actual true impact of the change on their organisation. And they needed to go back, and they went back into their organisation and they reshaped their project. They put far more emphasis on to the people side, the change in cultures and behaviours, and the change in leadership skills and capabilities. And therefore, they diverted what could have potentially been a failure into a successful organisation and a successful change for the organisation. So that's really a little bit about the start of the organisation, the impact assessment. Let's go now to the end of the change, which is another area where we often see failure. And the project has gone in, and everything has been put into the organisation. The people have been trained. Everything is now in to the organisation, and then often you find that your project team closes down. They hand over to the organisation. Your senior managers and leaders go on to the next big urgent issue that they're trying to deal with, and the organisation is then left to work in the new ways. But if there's no focus on people during this embedding stage, then it's very often people go back to their own old ways of working, and you find a few months down the line that your change hasn't embedded properly and therefore is not successful. And in the course, we look at this through systems thinking and vicious and virtuous circles. And by that, again, we look at the organisation as an interrelated whole. And we say that actually, if the project isn't embedding, then there is a problem somewhere within the system of the organisation. And it's really around finding out where that problem is and then intervening at that point to try and mend the system, mend the circle, and get the change embedded. And so we use just a generic example to describe that. So this is just a normal IT change. Somebody's put a normal, a new bit of software into their organization. And this is what happens. First of all, line managers don't like the system. And staff look to their line managers for direction. Team members don't adopt the change because their line managers aren't. Team members work around the system with no negative consequences. Everyone forgets to use the system. Few months down the line, what system? Now, I normally smile wryly at this point because I recognize this. I've seen this happen more than once, and quite a lot of the delegates on the course have also seen this. But if you look at this as a circle, and you can pinpoint, there's a couple of areas here where things aren't working and where some intervention can be put. The first is on point number 1, that line managers don't like the system. Obviously, line managers are hugely powerful in change, and basically, if they don't like a change, then the chances are that their staff won't like it either. So some intervention is needed here to sort of get the buy-in of the line managers and get them more enthusiastic about the change. And then there's another point that's broken in here, and that's around point number 4, that team members work around the system with no negative consequences. Obviously, there's some intervention that could be done there. There could be some negative consequences put in if people don't use the system. You can have a look at whether people are using alternative systems that could be closed down to try and encourage people to work a bit more in the system. And then hopefully you can then bring your system back into use and embed it, and then finally get the benefits from it. So again, just a very short example of where we've done this on the course in real life. I did an in-house course for a borough council, a county council, where they had gone through a big transformation. And like all the councils in the UK at the moment, there's lots of funding cuts, and councils are having to transform how they work considerably to continue to offer services with severely reduced amounts of budget. And this particular council had transformed their adult services department to try and run with less money. And so what they had done is, in their adult services department, they had a number of frontline staff whose job it was to go out and support people with learning and physical difficulties in their own homes. So they could continue to live and work in society, but they were supported through the council. So this meant that every frontline staff member had a portfolio of clients, and they worked very, very closely with them, and their job was basically out in the community, really, really supporting these people on a one-to-one basis. Now, obviously, that's hugely resource intensive. So the idea of the transformation was try to move to more of a centralized support model. So there was less one-to-one support and more use of things like technology to help support these people. So an example of that was around filling in benefits forms. Traditionally, the frontline staff had spent a lot of time working with each individual out in the community to help them fill in their forms to apply for benefits. And if anybody has tried to fill in a benefits form, you'll understand that this is an incredibly complex process, and so support is often needed. And the change was that rather than the frontline staff going out and helping everybody on a one-to-one basis, there was some IT programs built, there was some videos made, there was some frequently asked questions, which meant that people could could try and fill in their benefits form through the help of the online support in their own homes, and then all the frontline staff had to do was go out and check the forms before they got sent off. So this was obviously would release the frontline staff to do more work, and it meant that more people could get support just by kind of accessing the technology. And there was a range of interventions like that had been put in this particular transformation. The other change was that for the first time ever, the frontline staff were asked at the end of each day to fill in a log, a simple computer log, of what they had done every day, so what they had spent their time on doing. And there was two reasons for this. One was to really as a time check and efficiency check, which they'd never had to do before. But the main reason really was to look up trends. So if there were a lot of frontline staff spending their days supporting individuals with the same issues, like the filling of the benefits forms, then they could then have a look at how could they centralize that support and make it more efficient. And when I went to do the work, the course with the project managers in this particular county council, this new transformation had been going for a couple of months, and the project managers were concerned because the only monitoring they could do to see how the change was embedding was monitoring who went in and filled in their log at the end of every day, and it was incredibly low. So there was less than 30% of the frontline staff were actually going in and filling in their log. And so therefore, the project managers thought, well, if they're not filling in their log, the chances are they're probably not working in these new ways either, and therefore we're not getting the efficiency benefits that we need. And so they had actually put in an intervention that was going to begin in a couple of weeks. They had arranged for all of the frontline staff to have additional training on how to fill in the log. Now, anybody looking at the world through the eyes of a business change manager and looking at the system as a whole would probably begin to understand that the problem and the reason why the people weren't filling in the log wasn't because they didn't know how, but because they had chosen not to. So we had a look at the problem in a systems way and a vicious circle way, and we actually found out that there was a number of problems in the system. None of them were to do with how to use the technology. So the first issue was around the line managers, and a little bit like our generic example, the line managers were very unhappy with these changes. They saw this as cost cutting, they saw this as detrimental to their clients, and they were very unhappy, and therefore they were not encouraging their staff to work in these new ways. Therefore, the project team decided to do some interventions there. They would try and look at the benefits for the clients. They would try and see if there were any potentials to increase the service sort of value for clients there, and a bit of buy-in exercise there. And then we said, well, actually, is there more of an issue? Does the circle increase and expand out anymore, and are there troubles anywhere else? And it turns out actually that the issue was also at board level here. There was a project board, transformation board, that met every week, that was headed up by the head of adult services. And they had never once asked how the change was embedding. They'd never asked for evidence that it was embedding, and they'd never asked for any monitoring to be done. The reason for this is they were just so busy and they had to go on to the next issue and try and move on to the next part of the transformation. So the project team decided that they would put on the weekly agenda an item about discussing about embedding. They would bring those results about the logs up to the board, and the board could then take responsibility for embedding. They could exert pressure in whatever way they chose down to the line managers, and then the line managers would then complete the circle by supporting their staff to work in new ways. So again, this is a way that the project was saved from failure, and the systems and the new ways of working began to embed, and the benefits began to be felt. So that's really it from me at the moment. Just a couple of thoughts there around how the business change management can really help improve project effectiveness. I'm now going to pass over to Sarah to have a bit more of a chat about SPOCE and the course itself.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Nicola. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with SPOCE project management. I'm just going to give you a brief overview. So the change management course is very familiar to a lot of our other courses in the way that we deliver this. It's the 3-day foundation and then 2-day practitioner. So you do the foundation exam on the Wednesday and the practitioner exam on the Friday. The change management course is dissimilar to a lot of the courses because there's a lot of practical elements involved, and it covers the change in the individual, change in the organisation, communication and stakeholder engagement, change management practice. And the brilliant thing also is you can actually bring real life scenarios. So if there's something within your organisation or something as an individual that you want to bring to the table, you can bring that along and we can actually use those examples within the course. So you can take something back to learn from and implement. Now, you've heard a lot from Nicola. And Nicola will 99% of the time be delivering the change management course that you attend with SPOCE. We're very passionate that our trainers have real life experience. So when they're training the courses, they're very knowledgeable and very credible. So just some of the attendee feedback. A very well organised event with an excellent trainer. SPOCE provided first class support before, during the training. Very supportive and friendly. The course was run in a good pace, pre-course instructions and reading, Nicola tutor, facilitator. They learned a lot, practical exercises which really brought the content to life. And unreservedly recommend this company. The quality of the tuition, the learning materials, the venues and depth of experience of the trainers is second to none. So it really just illustrates that with SPOCE, we care very much about our trainers, the environment that we deliver our training in. And also, I just want to reiterate that we make sure that our pre-course is of a very high standard, our training materials and also our post resources. We really like to build relationships with our delegates, and you can call the office at any time and you'll always be able to speak to somebody. And we'll also give you access to trainers if that's needed. And we really care about the post resource as well and implementing everything you learn on the course. So what can SPOCE do? We can offer public courses. We have the largest public schedule within the UK for our training. We can also come out to you and deliver on-site courses. Normally there's about 4 or more of you in your organisation, then we love to come out and train on your site. And that's really beneficial for all the people within the organisation to make sure everybody's on the same path. Nicola could come out and provide a change management health check, so see where your organisation is at the moment and what you can do to move forward. We can mentor change managers. We can deliver workshops on specific change management techniques. And this is really key as well with SPOCE. We can come in, do awareness courses, overviews, very bespoke courses. Anything you want, we can come in and do and make sure that the right training is tailored at the right people within the organisation. And we can present to, like I just said, the whole organisation, from the key players to everybody involved. So the origins of SPOCE, founded 25 years ago, SPOCE Project Management has developed a reputation in the project, programme and risk management world for our pioneering approach to training. Our innovative approach and impeccable standards have continued to grow, and we are now pioneers in the distance learning world, becoming the first organisation to develop Prince 2 Practitioner, MSP, more recently Prince 2 Agile e-learning, and that's just to name a few. Paul, the MD, was also the founding member of Aspect, which is the Association for the Promotion of Excellence in Consultancy and Training, which is a body committed to maintaining the highest standards in training service delivery. I won't go through every reason to choose SPOCE, but there's just a few on your screen, but I've covered a lot of them already. But really, we are very passionate at what we do, and I just wanted to say to everybody that's attended this webinar, a thank you for trusting SPOCE to support you with your project management needs. We all know a sound project plan can be the difference between success and failure, and the fundamentals of managing a project from start to finish require a team of individuals with different talents and skills. That's where SPOCE come in. We appreciate a project follows a project life cycle, and there are hard skills to master, but well worth learning. And SPOCE loves nothing more than the opportunity to help organisations and individuals grow and campaign their competitive edge. So you've still got the history of achievements there. So it just shows how established we are in everything that we've done. So thank you again for continuing to grow and develop with SPOCE, and I look forward to seeing you on many more of our courses. Thank you. Any questions?
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Nicola. Yeah, we've got a few questions come in over the course of the webinar. So I'm going to start with one. It's probably be for Nicola. How much as a percentage of a project budget should be spent on the business change management element?
Thanks, Mark. It depends really, and I think it depends a lot on the impact of the change on the people. So if your project's going to have a big impact on people, so you can work that out by doing the impact assessment as we did earlier on the webinar, then you're obviously going to have to spend a lot more of a percentage of your budget on supporting people and activities to bring them along and get them to work in new ways. So I think you always need a percentage. I would say always put in 15 to 20% for business change activities. And if your change is going to have a big impact on people, and by that I mean on behaviours, cultures and values, then you will need significantly more than that. I've worked on projects where we've had at least 50% on business change management, and actually one project I worked on, I would say it was 80% on business change management activities, because really that was key. The change was all about getting people to work in new ways, and so that's really what we focused on.
Thanks, Nicola. Second one is a common thing that comes up with change, and it's resistance. So question is, how long should you spend on overcoming resistance? How do you balance this with the project deadlines, and especially when you have senior management wanting to push forward?
Okay, thanks, Mark. Resistance is my favourite topic. I could talk about this for hours, but I think the really important thing that we need to understand about resistance is that people do not resist because they don't like change. People resist because of what is done to them. So really it's around the way we roll our change projects out. And if we do it well, then there's less resistance. And if we do it badly, then we're going to have higher resistance. So if you have resistance in your project, I always use that as an indicator that we're doing something wrong, and I go back and I have a very close look at the decisions we're making, the way we're communicating and the way we're engaging, the way we are planning the future, to see what it is that's wrong. Having said that, I think, if you've got resistance for your project, it's a risk, and so you need to understand the risk of the project not being successful if the resistance continues. So it really depends on who's resisting and the ways they're resisting. So if you've got your middle managers resisting, for example, by not engaging, then the chances of your project being successful are minimal. Therefore, you need to put a lot of effort and a lot of intention to bring that resistance down. How you manage this against the project deadlines and leaders who want to push on, I think the key really is to talk to them in the words of risk. Yeah, a lot of people think business change is soft and fluffy, and therefore it's difficult for it to be given the same value at leadership level as a project plan, for example, where you've got tangible milestones and you can actually measure very clearly what you're doing. So if you put risks in your risk register around risks that there's resistance and therefore the change will not be adopted and therefore the benefits will not be successful, all of a sudden, you've taken this and made it a very tangible issue. And that will get the attention of your senior leaders. And they will then start to have a look at, actually, do they need to focus a little bit more on this, and maybe change, you know, sort of project deadlines and those sorts of things. Obviously, you can't always change if you've got a deadline, for example, a regulation is coming in or something like that, then you can't change deadlines, but there's always things that can be done. You just need the will from the senior leaders there. The other thing that can help with your senior leaders is to get people from the business that they respect to talk to them about the issues that are happening. Senior leaders will listen far more to people they trust who are out in the business working. So managers they trust, you know, operations managers that they trust. Get them to talk to the leaders about the resistance and the potential issues from it, because the leaders will listen to that far more than they will listen to a business change manager or a project manager. So just see who can carry your message, and also look at it from a risk point of view.
Great, thanks, Nicola. There's a couple here related to the actual role, and they're quite closely related, so I'll give you one at a time. Do you find that often the change management team is also the project management team? And if so, are there pros and cons? Should they always be separate? And then related to that, is there a growing trend to have hybrid business change managers and program managers? Again, there's some pros and cons.
Okay, great, thanks. Yep, so the first one, is the change management team always the project management team? So there's a couple of ways of answering this and looking at this. The answer is there's never and always. There's a myriad of different ways of doing things, but you often find that the business change, if you've got a business change manager role, they do sit with the project management teams. Now, this is a good thing, I think, because a project manager has to work incredibly closely with the business change manager, because you are basically, you know, working on the same thing, and projects change all the time. Scope changes, time changes, and so both the project manager and the business change manager need to know exactly what the other is doing. So if you have business change managers, they often need to sit very, very closely to your project and your program teams. However, if your project management team and your change management team are the same people, that's when we start to move into these hybrid roles, of which there are, you know, quite a lot of negatives as well as positives. So to answer the question around, is there a trend? I see a lot of business change manager roles. I haven't done any analysis myself, but I would say there is definitely a trend around this. Whether it's growing, I don't know, but I do know that business change management as a profession is growing. So one could assume that if there's more roles around, then there'll be more business change project managers around as well. There are pros and cons to this. I did speak about it a little bit earlier, but I'll just build this out a little bit. One of the positives about this role is that project management is always seen from a business change point of view. So when I did this role in a project, I was a business change project manager, and I was, with my project management hat on, I was responsible for always reporting to the board. I had day-to-day responsibility for deciding what activities to do and where to really put our priorities. And so I was able to make sure that business change did have an equal weighting in terms of reporting, in terms of what the senior leaders saw and the decisions they made, and also on the activities. So actually that was a very positive thing. However, there are negatives to it, and one of the negatives is that whenever there is an urgent issue around the project management piece, and projects constantly run with urgent issues, unforeseen issues, last minute panics, the business change work, which is longer, which is more strategic, and which is less tangible, often had to be put on the deprioritized to deal with these urgencies. Therefore, I found it rather frustrating, and I would say that 70% of my time was spent project managing and 30% of my time was spent on business change, not because that's what the project needed, but that was just how I had to split my time. So they can be done. I also think that another issue is possibly the skills of a business change manager and the skills of the project manager are not necessarily the same. So I think that it really depends on the type of project, the impact of the project, and also how important your project is to the business. And if your if it's really, really important that your project succeeds, then I would say there's an argument there for funding the different roles and looking at them as two different professions that are working together for a better outcome for the organisation.
Great, thanks, Nicola. This one's somewhat related as well. Is it better to have the change manager sourced from within the business or contracted from a specialist?
Okay, thanks. Again, it depends. There's pros and cons. I think that what we are aiming for, what I'm always aiming for as a business change manager, is to actually make myself redundant. You know, I would love to see a world where there is no need for specialist business change managers, because organizations have the maturity and the capability within themselves to manage change. And within that, you would be looking at capabilities for the leaders, capabilities for the middle managers, and also capabilities for the staff around having to manage change. We are not there for the majority of organizations, so we do need this role of business change manager. I would encourage every organization to have this capability within themselves. Therefore, develop business change managers who work within the organization all the time. The benefits of this are really that the business change managers know the business, they know the culture, they know the history, they know the impact of the changes, and they know the stakeholders, they know who's important, who has power, who's the person to talk to get things done. All of those things that if a business change manager comes externally, they have to learn these things, and this takes time. But pros of having business change managers come in from the outside is they're generally experts in their field. They know what they're doing. They've had lots of experience in different organizations, and therefore they can maybe bring in new ideas and new ways of trying things out that the organization maybe hasn't thought about. They're also not institutionalized, and often I hear in organizations, oh, we can't possibly do this, or we can't overcome that problem because we never have in the past. Well, that doesn't mean that it can't be done in the future, and sometimes bringing that person in from the outside can be that fresh pair of eyes that will challenge and really increase the organization's capabilities to change in ways they didn't think were possible. I would say, though, if you're ever bringing in a business change manager from the outside, don't ever let them go until they've done a knowledge transfer inside to really build that capability of business change within the organization itself.
Great, thanks, Nicola. The next two questions relate to communication. So again, I'll give these to you as a combined.
Okay.
How far in advance should you communicate the changes around the projects to the stakeholders and employees? And any thoughts on which medium should be used for those communications?
Okay, thank you. So a question that we spend hours talking about on any project I ever work on is, when do you communicate out to the business that there's going to be a change? And I've always been a real advocate of, as soon as you know a change is coming, get those messages out there. I think there's huge danger in communicating too late. I think that it means that people are mistrustful. I think it means people haven't got the opportunity to have the time to explore what the future will look like for them. And most importantly, it means that the people who really have the information and the ideas about what a good future may look like for the organisation are not involved at the critical planning points. And that's the people out in the organisation who are actually doing the jobs. Too many times change is planned behind closed doors by senior leaders, and it's only when they have an idea of what the future looks like that they will come out and communicate. To me, that's very, very dangerous. However, there are also dangers in communicating very early about changes, especially if the changes are going to be very impactful. For example, there's going to be job losses or enormous changes to the way that people work. And the danger really is that the first thing that people will ask when they hear about a change is, will I still have a job? And the second thing people will ask is, how does that affect me? How is the change going to affect me? Even if I still have a job, how am I going to be affected? And there's a danger that people become very subsumed in this and therefore fail to, you know, continue to do their business as usual work effectively because they are so worried about the future. So there is, you know, every change is different. I would say communicate out as soon as you can about the change. It doesn't matter if you don't have all the answers. There is no shame in communicating that there is going to be a change, and because of the drivers that we have possibly, therefore there is going to be a change needed, but you don't quite know what the future is going to look like or quite what the answers are. All you have to do is to let people know that there will be some work continuing and give them a date when you can come back to them with more information, and also give them somewhere where they can go to talk about the issues and maybe come up with ideas about what the future might look like. So early engagement is good, but there are just some thoughts around if the impacts are going to be great for the organisation, how you handle it so people don't feel threatened for long periods of time. In terms of the medium, I personally think that the richer the medium, the better in anything you're dealing with in change, and that basically means face-to-face. When I did one particular change where it was a UK-wide change, and the impact was quite great on people throughout the whole of the UK. So I used to pack my bag on a Sunday night, and I used to travel around the UK from Sunday to Friday every week, just talking with people, talking with the affected stakeholders, and communicating and engaging with them. And really, this was a key success factor in the change. If you can't speak face-to-face, then technology can go some way to helping that with telephone calls, webinars, but you have to make sure that the channels are what we call rich. Therefore, that people need to be able to feed back fairly immediately to what you're saying, and they also need to be able to have cues. So it's not just around the words, it's around facial expressions, it's around tone of voice, it's around being able to pick up those unspoken things as well. And the reason why these rich communication channels are so important to us in change is that so much of what we do is emotive, so much of what we do is unclear. There's, you know, a myriad of possible options. People feel very strongly about what we're doing, and therefore there's high risk of misinterpretation. Assumptions may be brought in there, and therefore people may misread things or need a lot of clarification. And we also need, a lot of our work is based on the reaction we get from what we've done so far. So we need to be able to really see people and engage with people to understand how they are taking our messages. One of the risks that we run in change is that most organisations have a standard way of communicating out their business as usual information, and this tends to be one way. This tends to be email or newsletters or an intranet. That's fine for certain information. I would say for instructions, possibly a long way down the line when everybody is bought into the change and you are just emailing out information about the details of where a workshop may be held, for example. But when we really want to communicate to people, engage with them and get them bought into the change, involved in the change, overcome resistance and fears, then we have to use our richer face-to-face communication channels.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Some great, Nicola, some great advice there. One more, well, time for a couple more questions. I think next one is for you, Nicola, and I think the final one will be more for Sarah. So if I take the last one for you, Nicola. If it's very silo-based, how do you break them down to enable organisation-wide change?
Okay, well, a lot of the times that I see people trying to change, one of the drivers for change is to break these silos down. So one of the benefits they are looking for is a less siloed organisation in the future. Therefore, you have to look at it as one of the aims of your change is to break these silos down. And this can be done in a number of ways and has to be sort of dealt with on a number of levels. For starters, your leaders really need to want to. And they need to want to work in less of a siloed way. So they need to be seen to be, you know, what we call walking the talk. They need to be communicating with their colleagues. They need to be looking at cross-organisational working. Another really good way of trying to break down silos is to set up a formal network of change agents or change champions. And these are people from the business, not necessarily managerial levels. They're often people working out on the ground. And you can have change champions from all around the business who come together and they form a network that will break those silos down, because they can communicate and engage with each other and look at ways of working and ways of engaging and ways of introducing the change across the organisation as opposed to up and down the organisation. And they are a very powerful way of beginning to break these silos down and getting much more cross-functional working.
Great, thanks, Nicola. And as I said, last question, I think probably more for Sarah. And the question is, does SPOCE offer distance learning courses? In other words, we're in the United States and are interested in attending an online training course.
Thank you, Mark. We don't offer online training for change management at the moment. The reason behind this is because, as you've probably gathered a lot from this webinar, the change management course does have a lot of practical and engaging exercises with the participants, because we believe that's essential for the knowledge and the skills to be embedded to manage the change effectively. That said, SPOCE are always pioneering, so if there's something that we can do, we will look to do it. So I'll take that question on board and work out if there is something that we can do, because I do appreciate that it is something people want to look at. Something I have been discussing with Nicola was a kind of virtual training potential, which may be where some people attend the actual classroom and others attend the course virtually. So it is something, like I say, that we are going to look into, because we do understand that depending on where people are within the world, it can sometimes be easier for them to do an online learning. We just need to give the change management in particular some thought to make sure that the embedding and the actual learning from the course is maximised. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Sarah. And conscious of time, I think that brings us to the end of the webinar. So I think we've addressed most of the questions that we got, but if there's anything that wasn't addressed or you feel you'd like to expand on, do feel free to get in touch. You'll have my contact details from the webinar emails, and there's various details on screen. So to close, thank you very much everyone for attending. We appreciate you taking time out of busy schedules to join us. We hope you found it valuable and informative. My thanks of course to Nicola and Sarah for their time and contributions. And finally, we hope to see you on future APMG webinars. So thanks again everyone. Bye now.
Bye.